Welcome back to Toowoomba Forward. I'm your host, Tim Entwistle, and we're endeavouring to interview all of the federal candidates for the seat of Groom. Joining me right now is the One Nation candidate, Rebecca Konz. Rebecca, thank you for being with me.
Thanks for inviting me, Tim.
Of course. So I wanted to start by just giving you a moment to introduce yourself to the viewers. Tell us a bit more about yourself and why you believe that you'll represent the needs of Groom better than any other candidate.
Okay, well, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and I'm a small business owner in Toowoomba. And Toowoomba, I've been here since 2000. I did move away for a short amount of time. I was working for child safety at the time, and I went up to Far North Queensland and worked remote up there in the Indigenous communities in child safety. And then I came back in about 2016, and I've been working in Toowoomba and working for myself for some of that time. I am passionate about helping people live better lives. That's what I've done throughout my career as a personal trainer and fitness instructor, as well as working in child safety. I want people to have their best life that they can, the best health and the best life circumstances, whatever that might be. So I say I'm just a natural born helper. I just want to help.
That's great.
And at the moment, I think Australia needs a lot of help. Where our living standards are dropping, our cost of living is rising, and people's lives aren't getting better. They're getting worse, and that's not okay in a country that is wealthy in resources. We should not be having the highest electricity costs in the world. We should have the cheapest electricity costs in the world because we have the fuel sources for that. We have good clean coal in Australia that burns with lower emissions, and we can build and fit coal-fired power stations to reduce those emissions even more.
Perfect.
And instead of that, we're sending our coal, some of it from this region, overseas. We're sending it to China, where they use it in all of their power stations to build wind turbines and solar panels and ship them back to us. Yeah. And that's not making our electricity cheaper, it's making it more expensive. And we can't afford to be pushing towards net zero. Now, if Australia was a big part of being responsible for those emissions, and it was going to make a difference to how much the climate changes, then sure, it might be worth it. But at the moment, nobody can really say how much Australia's contribution is, even if we went totally back to coal right now. No one knows. We're doing this for, I don't know, maybe a little bit. It could be. It could be as little as 0.01 of a degree, the amount of emissions that Australia makes that changes our climate. So that's one of my really important points for me, is to bring down the cost of electricity by bringing our coal-fired power stations back on board, because they don't like being switched on and off. And with the wind and the sun, they don't always. The sun's not shining at night. That's when the peak load of electricity is, and the wind's not always blowing at night either. It often dries at night time. So they're turning those coal-fired power stations up and down and on and off, and that damages them, increases maintenance costs. They've put tariffs on coal electricity, and they've put rebates on the solar and the wind, which makes them look cheaper, but they're not, because they're taxpayer money that's going towards that. And just because your electricity bill hasn't changed doesn't mean the cost of electricity hasn't gone up, and it doesn't mean that you're not paying for it with your tax dollars. Tax dollars that could be going to schools, that could be going to hospitals, that could be going to get more doctors trained, those sorts of things. And instead of that, it's going to pay for renewables that are not meeting their said capacity to.
Gotcha. And we'll expand on this later in some of the other questioning, but I appreciate your answer just about saying that, you know, you're a small business owner, you've come from this background where you're a helper, you want to make a difference.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I want to move to campaign strategy briefly.
Sure.
And what you've sort of started alluding to is that idea of taking full advantage of coal, taking advantage of the natural resources that we have to bring down prices. But your main quote on the webpage states states, my goal in line with One Nation's vision is to ensure that Groom becomes a safe, healthy and prosperous community where individuals and families thrive.
Yes.
I want to just take that quote because I think in principle, everyone should be able to agree with that quote.
Yeah.
Right? You know, everyone should say, I want a more prosperous life for my family and my community and that sort of thing.
Yes.
What is it about One Nation's policies and specifically your leadership that you're putting forward that you believe you'll be able to achieve this goal better than those major parties or an independent in this case?
Sure. Well, One Nation has a raft of policies that are all aimed at reducing the cost of living, from tax breaks for families, so income splitting between a higher earner and a lower earner to bring that higher earner back down a tax bracket, so that, because at the moment a lot of people have gone through bracket creep. So their living wage hasn't gone up, but their taxable income is now into a higher tax bracket. So with the income splitting for families, that will allow one parent to maybe work lower hours so they can stay home with the children, because we know that children that have more contact with their parents at that younger age, particularly up to 5 years old, have a better outcome in the end.
Sure.
We've got absolutely surging youth crime happening in Toowoomba particularly and around and the surrounding areas. And from my work with child safety and in that space, we know that when there's not a father in the home, that a boy is more likely to end up in crime or in jail. If there's no father figure that is a strong and regular part of a boy's life growing up, it's more likely that he will end up in the justice system.
Yeah, sure.
So we want, and when two parents are working full time, the kids are not getting the best of the parents. Their jobs are. Your job won't let you only give them 10% because you've got a sick child at home. Your job wants 100% of you all the time. So when you've got two parents working where they're giving 100% to their job, they can't then give 100% to the children or the family. So the family unit is more likely to break down.
So can I ask you, just as a quick follow-up briefly, what is the perspective that One Nation is approaching these problems that is different? So just like quick zoom out from the policy, because I think that the tax income splitting between couples, I think that's a great idea. But I just want to understand, what is that bird's eye view perspective and approach that One Nation is taking to these massive issues that every party is and independent is wrestling with right now? What is that that's different from them?
Well, One Nation has fully costed all of these policies, so we've already got that ready to, they're ready to go.
Right.
Day one, we're in there, we're doing it from day one, so that's different. The independents don't have the backing of a party where you've got more than one, you're there on your own, and while they might have good intentions for things, it's very difficult for them to get things across and through because they've got no other support around them.
Sure.
I don't see any of these tax break policies coming. I mean, Labor offered $5 a week. No, the income splitting is up around about $10,000 a year. So from a bird's eye point of view, it is the big picture. This is just one part of a puzzle, and that One Nation has a raft of policies to cover. So when you're keeping the family unit together, stopping that family breakdown, you've taken the first step to reducing youth crime. One Nation is more about putting the fence at the top of the hill instead of the ambulance at the bottom of the hill. Adult crime it's the ambulance at the bottom of the hill.
Sure.
It's trying to fix the problem at the wrong end. This is a social issue. It's not about punishment. While we don't agree with the revolving door of go in, see the magistrate and back out on the street again doing crime again, that's not what we're saying at all. But we want to fix the problems upstream instead of at the end when it's too late.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Now I want to ask a pretty pertinent question to campaign strategy in general for the past few elections that One Nation's had, because the seat of Groom is a Groom stronghold. Sorry, it's an LNP stronghold,
Yeah,
right?
for
So the
sure.
Liberal National Party has held this place ever since its inception.
24 years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's been very conservative,
Yes.
very locked down.
Yes.
From a policy perspective, the LNP has considerably drifted centre-left, more and more election after
Very
election,
much.
and in many ways probably doesn't align with many of the conservative values
Yes.
that the people of Groom have.
You've nailed it.
Yeah, so what I'm curious about is, does One Nation as a party take this seat seriously?
Absolutely.
And I would just qualify that by saying that, you know, we look at the work and the effort that people like, say, Suzie Holt has done by continuing to campaign between 2022 to 2025,
Yes.
leaving a really long and considerable amount of time for a community to get to know one candidate.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few candidates out there, a few voters out there who might be feeling some frustration that a conservative party like One Nation has not done that sort of long, hard work of introducing one candidate, sticking with them over a long period of time.
I'm not sure if you're aware the candidate who ran in the last federal election has passed away.
He has passed,
so
yes.
That is one of the reasons.
That would be an exception to the
hasn't
discussion.
been that consistency because, you know, that did happen.
But I should just say as well, on the state and federal levels, there's sort of, and I would just say personally, I have felt like there has been a revolving door of candidates.
Yes,
with the exception of Grant, and of course, you know, all respect to him as well.
Yes. Look, I can't say that you're wrong in that. Look, I intend to stick around. That's my goal. All going to plan and nothing untoward happening to me.
Of course.
That is my plan. My plan is to stick around, and I think that in the last 3 years, One Nation has improved their game. They have they've brought all these policies to the table. They've got some really great policy advisors now, with Pauline and Malcolm, and Senator Malcolm Roberts is also up for re-election at the Senate level this year. So and he has been holding the feet of the majors to the fire. He's been asking the hard questions that a lot of people want the answers to, and that is what One Nation does. Is we are making sure that we're pushing back against those policies that take away people's freedom, that increase the cost of electricity, that reduce people's, increase red tape and things like that. We are about smaller government, we're about reducing government waste. There's $90 billion worth of government waste been identified by One Nation that we will rein in as soon as we get enough power to do that. And in the meantime, we're still pushing back on them, even if we're not holding the seat. If you look at the policies that have recently been released by the Albanese government and Dutton's opposition, you'll find that One Nation had those policies 6 months ago. So if they're stealing our policies, that means they know that they're the policies that the people on the ground, the voters, want. Because by stealing those policies, they then, of course, take the wind out of our sails. Well, we're going to do the same, so you may as well just vote for us, because, you know, One Nation can't win. So you may as well just vote for us because, you know. But what we know is Albanese has lied multiple times about bringing down the cost of electricity, whether that was an oversight or and it just didn't happen, not sure. But we can't trust them to actually do what they say they're going to do, because time and time again, they have proven that they don't follow through. So they make the big policy announcements, but then they don't follow through. So we are there in the small way that we can, pushing back and trying to get them to stay true to the policies that they promised people at an election.
That's great. Thank you for that, Rebecca. So voters increasingly want, just switching gears now to some more specific policies that the seat of Groom is looking for.
Yes.
People in Toowoomba seem to really want a fast passenger rail from Toowoomba to Brisbane.
Yes.
Do you support that?
Look, I would like there to be a fast passenger rail. At the moment, that's not part of our policies.
Sure.
At the moment, One Nation has been focusing on the inland rail and getting the route for that updated to a more sustainable route with a termination at the Port of Gladstone, coming through Toowoomba. It'll still have the internodal in Toowoomba, but at the moment, Brisbane Rail is nearly full. there's very little room for more traffic into Brisbane Rail. That's part of the problem with the current inland rail problem, is that it's going to overload the rail network in Brisbane really quickly. Also, the Port of Brisbane is full as well, or nearly to capacity. So if you are sending more freight down that way, it's going to come to capacity really quickly, whereas the Port of Gladstone is just being upgraded now to receive incoming, because at the moment it's just an export port.
Sure.
So by having the inland rail, which has been on the cards for so many years,
Yonks, yeah.
that terminates in Gladstone, then the incoming freight goes one way, the outgoing freight goes the other way, and the knock-on effects for Australian manufacturing are huge for that inland rail and for jobs and infrastructure, etc. As far as the passenger rail goes, as I say, it's not a policy that One Nation has at the moment, and again, we've got and just putting that together, is it going to be affected by the fact that the Brisbane rail network is almost to capacity as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's a multifaceted issue, like you said.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's not a silver bullet necessarily,
no,
but I appreciate your perspective on that.
It's not that I'm against it. I certainly...
Oh, for sure.
I have a son who lives in Brisbane who doesn't drive, so he has to catch a bus. And
gotcha.
So I understand the clunkiness of the
So to be
bus
clear, like say if
system.
there was, obviously without the policy specifics of it, if let's say you get elected this election,
I would investigate
you investigate it.
Yeah.
Let's say a bill comes forward and they say we're going to build it,
yeah,
and we'll figure out the rest.
Yeah.
And make sure that it's affecting as few stakeholders as possible.
That's it.
You go along.
Yeah.
You'd be open to sort of supporting
I'd
that.
certainly be open to
Sure.
Getting into it and making
Thank
it work too, because sometimes there's vested interests and they don't always come up with the best solution. And I think that's one of the places that One Nation stands out, is that because we will back whoever's got the best plan, not just the plan.
Yeah.
So I think that's another point of difference for One Nation.
Sure.
Is if Albanese was to come up with the policy that we really supported, we would back it.
Yep.
And same with Dutton.
Yeah.
Or the Greens or whoever. If they put up forward a bill that is common sense and will make the lives of Australians better, then we'll back it.
Okay, appreciate that. Just wanted to switch gears to the topic of nuclear. Does One Nation support nuclear?
One Nation supports investigation of nuclear while using our cheap coal to get there. We know that it will take 7 to 10 years to build a nuclear power station, and there's different ways of doing nuclear now than there were, say, 50 odd years ago.
Things like small modular reactors.
Small modular,
sort of
different types of substrate that you put in there. Yes. Can't think of the right word there.
Isotopes.
Isotopes, that's it. So there's a lot of different things.
Yep.
The other thing that Australia has going for it with nuclear, because everybody's like, oh, it's too dangerous, Fukushima, Chernobyl, and there's another one in America, I think. Australia isn't on a fault line. And it isn't 1950s Russia, Soviet Union. There were some really huge human errors that happened in Chernobyl, because if you go up against the party, you get shot in the head. So things were not reported, things were not looked after properly in Chernobyl.
Sure.
There's a knock-on effect of many factors that led to that. Terrible disaster, awful. I'm aware of it too. Was that in 1986 actually? And so yeah, totally aware. I was very anti-nuclear as a young person, because I grew up in the 80s when anti-nuclear was the thing. We were anti-nuclear, everything was anti-nuclear, and I was anti-nuclear as well then. However, I've matured and I've got more knowledge now, and I understand that it is a viable solution for Australia. It is emissions free. They can recycle the water for the cooling that doesn't use a lot of water now, because they can recycle that water. And we can use the existing infrastructure. One of the issues that's making renewables more expensive is the additional infrastructure that is needing to be put in, the high voltage power lines and things that are having to be put in to accommodate. And the other thing that absolutely breaks my heart is the destruction of our forests for putting up wind towers, and the loss of our farmland to put in solar panels. Solar panels and wind turbines in an urban setting where they're a smaller one on the top of roofs, on car parks and things like that. It's brilliant. It's great. We need to keep doing it.
Sure.
However, we don't need to keep doing it at the detriment of our environment and our own quality of life.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that. I want to switch gears to the housing affordability discussion.
Yes.
So specifically here in Groom, and I really want to just drill down to hear for voters in this electorate, what do you think is causing these incredible house prices to go through the roof here in Groom, especially since now the average or the median house price in Toowoomba City is $604,000.
Yes.
So what do you think is causing it here in Groom, and what do you think can be done for it here in our electorate?
Well, it is multifactorial. It's not one single thing. There's the increase in immigration. We've brought in 1.2 to 1.5 million people in the last 3 years.
Across Australia?
Across Australia.
Sure.
And we have received a lot of those immigrants. And now, I'm not anti-immigration. I love people from other countries. I've always had, nearly always had friends from other countries in my whole entire life.
Of course.
And I have nothing against immigration. However, we're too much too fast. Australia's always been very conservative with our immigration, and yet in the last 3 years it's just gone through the roof. And there's agreements with India and other places to bring in more and more migrants, and that's putting pressure and making there be not enough houses available either for purchase or for rent. I'm talking to people in Groom who are looking at 40 to 50 properties before they get a new rental. And the other thing that is happening, I'm just going to stick on the rental for a minute.
Sure.
But it does go across to housing availability, is that international corporations are buying up rental homes and putting up the price of rent, which is forcing people out of those homes that they're already in because they can't afford a $90 a week increase in rent. They're then forced back into the rental market to then go and have to find another home, look at 40 or 50 places. Everybody's trying to work, everybody's trying to earn a living so they can put food on the table. Meanwhile, they're having to go and look at rental properties, and even the other rental properties that that meets their needs have gone up $50 a week. So it's jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, really, to leave that one that's gone up 90 to go and then find another one that's still $50 a week more than you can really afford.
Sure.
And the income to housing cost ratio has gone up so much. So in Groom, we have got the pressure from the immigration.
Yep.
There's also 49% of the cost of building a house is taxes. That's half the price of your house to build is taxes.
Yeah, right.
So One Nation is going to just remove the GST off building products.
Materials and products, yep.
Up to $1 million house.
Sure.
And that will go for 3 years or 5 years, I'm not exactly sure on the amount of time, and reduce immigration. We want to have basically net zero immigration rather than net zero emissions.
Sure.
But because Australia is over capacity at the moment for our housing, and whether it's purchasing or renting, everybody deserves a place to live.
Yep.
And we need to take that pressure off. There are around about 75,000 illegal immigrants in Australia, and One Nation wants to send those people away. If they want to reapply and come back another time, that's okay, but we don't allow illegal immigration in Australia either. And then reduce the number of incoming immigrants back around to that 130,000 rather than where it is at the moment, because that's just unsustainable. It's not only putting pressure on house prices, putting pressure on our services, on our hospitals, on our doctors, and it's putting pressure across the board.
Of course. Yeah, okay. So just in summary, the main approach that One Nation will be taking to the issue at large, but we're seeing a sort of microcosm of it here in Groom, is just to try to reduce immigration to net zero and reduce the taxes and the regulatory burden on what it takes to build a home.
That's right.
Okay.
One of the other things that got pushed through quite recently was that all new homes have to be built to be wheelchair compliant.
Sure.
That's going to add $50,000 to the cost of building a new home.
Right.
And young people are already struggling without adding a further burden of having compliance for something that more than likely will not.
They may not need in the short term.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Now, I want to ask this question as well, because it seems that the major parties have not done a really good job at answering it, and I'd love to see what you have to say. Do you want house prices to go down or remain stable or go up?
Look, that's a really tricky question, and I know anyone who owns a house obviously doesn't want the price of their house to go down. Deflation in housing is not something that people really want to see. I think what we want to see is the equalisation and the rebalance of that income to housing cost measure again. So I think it used to be around 30%.
Yes, that's right.
Was your mortgage or your rent,
yep.
And now it's up around 50%.
Yep.
And that's actually also making it hard for people to get rentals because the cost of the rental, because real estates work out how much you can pay in rent by your income, and if the rent is more than 30% of your income, then they won't approve you for the property.
Sure.
So that's putting pressure on as well. So getting that balance back with reducing the bracket creep issue with the tax that I was talking about earlier. A lot of tax reform. One Nation would like to do a lot more tax reform than even the policies that we've already released have. But real wage increases, real tax deductions, the income splitting thing, having an extra $10,000 a year in your pocket is going to make it easier for families to afford houses. So what I'm saying in that roundabout way by putting all those other bits in there is that I don't think it's likely that house prices will come down, although there can be a correction in the housing market when there has been a bubble.
Sure.
There's often a correction, and house prices don't always go up. Sometimes they come down, but it's the amount that they come down that I suppose we've got to balance.
Yep.
And also getting international investors out of the market. One Nation will give international investors 2 years to sell their property. That will put houses on the market for other people to buy, Australians to buy.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Yes.
And also we want them out of Australian farming as well.
Okay.
So we want to remove the international investors and get the housing back into Australian hands so that it's not. And international buyers can get first home buyers from China. And I can't go and buy land in China, let alone get a government subsidy to buy land in China. So why do we have it them buying property here? And it's not only China. I don't mean to pick on China. It was just...
I get what you're saying. Yeah, so, and that's because this is what I'm interested in, because it used to be that it was about 3 to 5 times your salary needed to, in terms of versus the cost of the house versus how much your yearly wage is.
Yes, that's right.
It was roughly about 3 to 5 times. And that's typically within the range of acceptability in terms of what percentage it takes up in your regular income month to month, that sort of thing. There are places and parts of Toowoomba here where it's up to 7, 8, 9 times the average salary to get into a property. To me, I think that yes, reducing the immigration will probably have an effect on availability. And then, of course, with the tax reforms that you may be bringing in, with income splitting, that could give a tangible boost in wages. So that gap will be closed slightly.
Yes.
But there is a part of me that says that I think that you're either going to see house prices be corrected or drop because of a drop in immigration, because of a drop in demand.
So increased supply, decreased demand, also the properties that are owned by international holdings being released onto the market.
Sure.
And one of the reasons that they've given them a 2-year grace period to do that is so that the market doesn't get flooded.
Yeah,
so if we said you've got to do it by the end of the year, the market would be flooded, and that would definitely cause a decrease in house prices.
Gotcha.
So that's what part of the strategy is, to not totally bum out the bottom of the housing market, because a lot of people are using investment properties for investment for their superannuation as well. So you've got to take that into account as well, is if you bottom out the house prices, then those people are going to be losing out on their investments for their superannuation as well.
Sure.
So it's a balancing act. It's not either or, but it's about minimising the damage and increasing and maximising the giving back, I guess, the positive side of it.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Now, I wanted to ask, if you secure the seat of Groom, you may be the deciding vote for which major party will be able to form government.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, there's negotiations behind closed doors that you need to have in terms of guarantees that you can receive.
Yes.
But in principle, which major party will One Nation be leaning more towards allowing to form government?
In principle, we would lean towards the Liberal Party.
Sure.
As you said earlier, they have moved away from their conservative base, and I think one of the things that I feel, because I was talking to you about how when I was a teenager I was like anti-nuclear and all of that.
Sure.
And I was very Liberal Party, obviously didn't have One Nation back then, but I was Liberal Party focused back then. And my mother doesn't remember, but I told her I was going to be a politician one day.
Well, here we are now.
Took me a long time, but I got here. So because I could see the environment, and it was about the environment and the environmental issues. So why aren't I in the Greens Party? I'll leave that one to you. So One Nation is now the Conservative Party the Liberal Party used to be. We don't have those left-leaning people in our party, centre to left. There's actually more centre-left or centre-right, whichever way, however you fall on the line, in the Liberal Party now. And at the moment, the Liberal Party is being probably, from my outside view looking in, it's my opinion, being guided into their policies by the left side of the party, even though they might be supposedly on the right. They're being led by the left-leaning sort of principles. So One Nation is now filling that space as a conservative party.
Yeah. And so your position would be to lean more towards supporting the Liberals, because they're more receptive to listening to that conservative voice. There's still some conservatives in the LNP.
And Pauline Hanson came from the Liberal Party.
Sure.
She was ousted from the Liberal Party because she refused to stop speaking. But we're the party of free speech. We're the party that we want freedom of religion. We want freedom to choose whether you have a medical treatment.
Sure.
So we're the more freedom leaning. So that's where we would lean, is with the.
I will just take a second to pull you up on that one, because the One Nation quite happily passed the recent hate speech bill that went through.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't happily pass it at all.
So my understanding is that they did actually, they supported the banning of public displays of hate symbols.
It's not so cut and dry.
Sure.
So One Nation does not support hate crimes and doesn't want people to be harmed or threatened with harm because of their religion, sexuality, etc., all those things that were in that bill.
Sure.
However, that bill was a dreadful bill. It was not a good bill. It was not worded well. The wording was much too loose, so it left it open for things that aren't hate crimes to be used. And I'd take issue with the media on this. Pauline was announcing these big policies that we have that will change the lives of Australians. She was in the middle of making that policy announcement, and I'm guessing she had been working some really long hours. And the media threw that question at her because that bill was being guillotined without any oversight. And they worded the question badly to her and said, will you be supporting the hate speech bill? And her answer, I feel like she tripped over herself, which sometimes Pauline Hanson does. They asked her if she was going to support it or not, and I've watched it several times to make sure I heard it correctly, and she said, I've voted against hate speech bills in the past this time I might vote for it. But I'm not sure that's actually what she meant to say. I don't know what her motives were. I can only say what I heard.
Sure.
And then they went back in, and that bill was being what they call guillotined. So it was being pushed through the major parties, and the Greens were Malcolm and Pauline asked for amendments, they asked for discussion time, they asked for more time to actually work on the bill, refine it and make it a more succinct and meaningful bill. At the moment it's fairly meaningless.
Sure.
So they did not support how that bill was worded and being pushed through. Which would have, yes, restricted speech. So what they do, but they still don't, and for me, a crime is a crime. I don't know why you need to put the word hate in front of it,
sure.
But that's what happened. That's why they abstained. They didn't vote for it. They didn't vote against it. They actually, because the bill was bad, but the principle, underlying principle of crime against someone because of their colour, sexuality, race, what have you, is not acceptable.
Sure, and this because I think it's an important discussion to have about freedom of speech,
yes.
and obviously we don't have time to go too depth for it.
We could do this for all day.
We absolutely could. But just recently, I'd say about a month ago,
yes.
one of the former Deputy Prime Ministers
yes.
from under Scott Morrison's cabinet, his name escapes me right now.
Yes.
In his electorate, a certain librarian, I think owning a bookshop or something, put pictures up, and I'll refer this in the video as well,
sure.
so that I'm not just talking out of my butt, but basically putting up photos of Peter Dutton, Albanese, and a few other LNP members, including that former Deputy Prime Minister, as Nazis. Basically using AI to generate them looking like that.
Yes.
Now, it was of the opinion of that Deputy Prime Minister, the former Deputy Prime Minister, that this was a hate crime, essentially, and that he was going to refer it to the Human Rights Commission to say this was wrong, blah, blah, blah.
Everybody's got the right to do that.
For sure, but do you think that it should be within the realm of political discourse to accuse your political opponents of being Nazis if you firmly believe that they are implementing or using Nazi policies, and by using that, depicting these sorts of pictures?
This is challenging for me because I'm borderline free speech absolutist,
sure.
which means you say and do whatever you say, whatever you like, not do. Say whatever you like. When I meant do, I meant put a picture up of someone. However, whatever, you know, as long as people can see that it is satire, because satire and comedy is not covered under those slander and stuff laws. But for me, I like free speech because it tells me who you are. Yeah. And then I can decide whether I want to have anything to do with you or not. But having free speech doesn't mean it's free from consequences either. As I say, free speech absolute, but doesn't mean that something bad won't happen back if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong
sure.
time.
Gotcha.
You can have the consequences of that. But I don't like government banning anything. That's one of my things, and it's not necessarily 100% in line with One Nation. It's a personal opinion that I don't like things being banned.
For sure, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for that slight tangent there. I was really interested to hear your thoughts on that. Now, I wanted to switch over to the topic of Indigenous voices and Indigenous peoples and supporting them. In 2023, the referendum to enshrine an Indigenous voice to Parliament was resoundingly rejected by Groom, with 76.3% disagreeing with it.
Yeah.
How did you personally vote on that issue? And now mentioning that you have experience in Indigenous issues in previous years, how will you advocate for Indigenous peoples here in Groom? Yes,
there were so many issues with the voice that will tell you which way I voted. And what we've seen, and Pauline has done a lot of research and talking to Indigenous people on the ground in different areas around Australia in the last 10 years that she's been back in Parliament. The money isn't getting to Indigenous people either in Groom or anywhere else in Australia. Billions of dollars are being given to closing the gap and the gap is getting wider. It's not getting smaller. And one of the reasons for this is fraud and corruption in those organisations.
Sure.
One Nation's approach is to dismantle what we've already got and rebuild it in a meaningful way. There are gaps in between Indigenous and non-Indigenous children. However, there are a lot of similarities on a class or an income level, if you want to, I don't like the word class in Australia, but on an income level. Indigenous kids and low-income white kids are struggling just as much with their literacy.
Sure.
And one of the things that One Nation stands for is one nation, one people, one law for everyone. That no one should be given differential treatment because of their race, skin colour, or nationality, or where they came from.
Sure.
Everyone should be equal and should receive the same level of support, the support that they need right here, right now.
And I'll just ask you, before we go through the next questions, just
Sure.
Enterprise from the LNP has made a campaign promise to launch a royal commission into family and sexual violence in
Yes.
Indigenous communities.
Yes.
Would you support that?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. The last three questions, two of them are pretty big. One of them is just a great little sign-off.
Okay, sure.
And then we'll be all wrapped up. So as the federal member for Groom, you will be the primary advocate to Canberra around all foreign policy issues.
Yes.
You're the one that we're going to be emailing, sending letters to.
Yes.
And here in Groom, we have a large evangelical Christian population.
We do.
Along with a growing Muslim community.
Yes.
So where do you stand on the war in Gaza? And what's your stance on providing military aid to Israel or pursuing a ceasefire?
I want people to stop dying. I am not for any government or organisation that uses violence to solve problems.
Sure.
I am for diplomatic solutions. I don't want to see Israeli children harmed. I don't want to see Palestinian children harmed. And I don't want to see any children harmed. I don't want to see any innocent people harmed. And I'm not in favour of sending military support to any country. I think we should mind our own military issues because we do have some things that we need to think about on our own military front. So we should it's a defence force for Australia. It's the Australian Defence Force.
Sure. And that almost answers my follow-up question about the war in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
You'd support ending all military aid towards Ukraine, is that right? Or?
Yes, I am all for diplomacy, and while I realise that there are going to be occasions when diplomacy isn't going to work, I want to see all diplomatic and talks exhausted
Sure.
before military action is taken.
Yeah.
My husband was in the army for 35 years. He still works for the defence. He's still part of the Army Reserve. My eldest son is also part of the Army Reserve, and he also works for defence. And I would not be happy for them to be sent to Ukraine because it's not their fight.
Yeah.
And I don't think that sending Australian young people to a foreign country where, when you listen to people who have been around the defence, like American defence, for a long time, they are saying Ukraine cannot win this war no matter how many young people are thrown at it. And so in drawing it out further and killing, the number of Ukrainians that have already died in this war is over 1 million, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
For me, war is a racket to make the military-industrial complex richer. It is not what it's portrayed to us about.
Well, that's a very strong contrast to what Peter Dutton said just a few weeks ago, calling Zelensky a modern-day Churchill and committing to continuing the war.
Yes, and I am personally not in line with continuing
Thank you for
any
that.
conflicts. I would like them to all stop tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, I want to ask you the last two questions. Firstly, just about the relationship between China and the USA and where Australia stands in the middle of that. Because obviously Australia has strong military ties to the USA, but
strong trade ties to China.
Strong trade ties. So I think the stat I said, up to 35% of our total exports, that's billions of dollars coming from China.
Yes.
So if you're elected, what sort of policies are you going to be supporting, and how are you going to walk that line between keeping a strong relationship with the USA while also maintaining those economic ties to China? Or do you have an alternative to finding new ways to make money apart from a Chinese economy?
Yes, that's a very interesting question.
And I should tie that back to the Groom side of things as well, because Groom. Exports beef, cotton, barley and timber to China.
Yes.
So,
Yes, China is a recipient of a lot of the farming produce and coal and things that are sent from Groom. So it's a big question. Look, it's something that I'm going to have to put off at this point in time to down the track, because it is, first of all, the whole Trump administration is really quite new. We haven't even really seen a lot going on with the current government and being able to juggle that situation, because it is such a new situation. And look, Donald Trump is the president of the USA. He's not the president of Australia. He's not supposed to be doing things to make Australia great again. He's supposed to be doing things to make America great again, and he's doing what he thinks he needs to do to make America great again.
Sure.
That is going to step on some other people's toes, because really, if you want to lay it out, the world's been taking advantage of America and its generosity and its military for a very long time, and not necessarily giving a lot back.
Sure.
You know? So America is doing American stuff for America. Okay, that's good. We need a leader here in Australia who puts Australia's interests above the interests of the other countries as well. And how you juggle that between military and goods and services and things like that is going to be it's going to be a huge task. You've also got the Chinese military doing war games around the outside of Australia, bit of sabre rattling, I think. So that has to be dealt with as well, and I don't think that the current government has necessarily dealt with that particularly well. So
just to summarise, you will pursue strong diplomatic ties with the USA and continue to maintain that?
Absolutely.
And do you support like a good friendship with the USA?
Absolutely.
That works?
I think
sure.
we will always, unless, always is a strong term, there's no reason to think that we won't continue to maintain a good friendship with America.
Sure.
And as far as China goes, what America does is going to impact our relationship with China as well.
Of course.
And so, because this, as I say, is a new situation, we're going to have to look into it and find ways to negotiate around that, because I think that we don't know what the impacts of what America is doing right now is actually going to have on our trade with China, because
Sure.
it's got to come out in the wash. Some of Trump's saber rattling using tariffs it's just negotiating tools. It's the art of the deal. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily what's going to come out in the wash. At the moment, it looks like China's pushing back and just going, no, we're not going, and putting their tariffs up.
Yes.
There's tariffs on Australian wine going into China and
Sure.
things like that. So using tariffs as equalisers is a thing that's done all over the world.
So your stance is just we'll wait and see. And
I think we need to wait and see,
while
because
pursuing good, strong ties with the USA and China.
I think we should maintain good relationships with both of them.
Sure.
I think that China is a strong trade partner for Australia, and we need to maintain those relationships. But we also need to be wary and stay on our game where China is concerned, because there's other issues at play as well.
Of course.
So,
okay, thank you for that. So just last question, Rebecca, thank you for your time and this conversation that we've had, but I wanted to give you one last chance to provide your final message to potential voters to secure that vote.
Yeah, sure. Look, One Nation is the Conservative Party that the Liberal Party used to be. We have the conservative values. We're more closely aligned to the Christian values. We want Australia is based on Christian morals, and our laws are written from a Christian point of view. That doesn't mean that we can't have other religions come into our country, but we shouldn't be changing the way that we do things in Australia for people who are coming into our country from other places where I'm assuming they didn't like how things were done there, or they would have stayed there.
Sure.
So as far as if you vote for me, One Nation and I will work for Groom to ensure that everyone has a house to live in. Everyone can afford to buy a house, and everyone can afford their food, groceries, electricity and fuel.
Great. Rebecca, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tim.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.